Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Welcome. If you're just joining, you will be placed in silence mode. Although we encourage you to post your questions for the speaker, this is a live session, so we encourage you to post questions for the speaker in the Q&A. Also, one of the lucky winner will win a 12-month subscription to the VIP community, where all the recordings are available on demand and also interaction with the speakers. So feel free to post a question in the Q&A. So at the end of the day, we'll have a drawing, random drawing. So you don't have to be present there, but we'll announce via the email there. So we'll get started in just a minute. All right, welcome everybody. This is Lucian Fogoros. Thank you for joining IoT World Cybersecurity Day. Thank you to our speakers. Also want to take this up and thank our sponsors, Adolus, RunSafe, Tempered, Trend Micro, and Archer Security, as well as Building Cybersecurity for supporting this event. I'm now going to turn it over to Tyler, who will moderate today's session. And thank you for that, Tyler.
Well, thank you for having me. First off, I'll introduce myself. My name's Tyler Cohen Wood. I'm a former senior intelligence officer and deputy division chief for the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I developed many complex cyber solutions for the intelligence community. I am a three-time author, keynote speaker, and cybersecurity influencer. And I'm currently in the process of launching a new healthcare platform. Thank you guys for joining us. I want to welcome you to Incident Communications, How to Disclose a Cyber Incident. Cybersecurity breaches are at an all-time high, and with the complexity and scale of connected devices, we not only need to understand the increasing threat landscape with connected devices, but we also need to be prepared in the event of an incident. Well, lucky for us, we have 4 top experts here to discuss the do's and don'ts, shoulds and shouldn'ts around this vital topic so that you are prepared. Now, I will let each member introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Benedict.
Hi, everyone. I work at Microsoft on a product called Azure Sphere, and our goal is to deliver the most secure and reliable IoT solution that spans silicon, operating system, and cloud. And in my role on the team, I lead 3 efforts. One being finding vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. 2, improving the security of our product over time. And 3rd, helping the security community and governments better understand the IoT security risks and what it really takes to mitigate them. So to achieve that, I'm managing our red team exercises, bug bounties, security challenges, but also working with other Microsoft product teams and governments as well to raise the bar for IoT security and hopefully the whole ecosystem. So very excited to be here today at this panel, and I look forward to the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, John, would you please introduce yourself?
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm John Gita. I'm CTO and co-founder of Jitsuin, where I look after technology and product dedicated to managing security, trustworthiness, and compliance for operators of essential services. So where we're at IIoT World here today, what we look to do is to provide as good visibility to root causing and ultimately incident avoidance, if not reporting, for industrial installations, particularly as it pertains to supply chain and collaborative working. My history is all in a similar space, high-end crypto and security. So I've held executive roles in a company like Trustonic, which many of you will probably know, puts in secure execution to things like ARM chips for mobile phones, for doing highly secure things on mobile phones to defeat things like rootkits, so right down in the very bottom end. And also prior to founding Jitsuin, I was CTO of Talus eSecurity, the major enterprise security products vendor, where I had a couple of roles particularly pertinent to this because I was in charge of product security, having to make disclosures and assess the vulnerabilities and so on, but also working on industrial installations, PKIs for smart cities and such, for example. That's where I'm coming from today.
Thank you, John. Asaf?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Asaf Farel. I'm the chief scientist and one of the founders of Karamba Security. Karamba is working on a cybersecurity agent for devices, for embedded devices like the industrial, industrial devices that we're talking about today, both for protection and also for reporting, and therefore very relevant to the topic. Myself, I'm a software engineer. I'm from Unit 8200, the famous Unit 8200 in Israel. So I have a lot of interesting stuff back then. And I worked for many years in Checkpoint. Checkpoint is one of the leading cybersecurity companies, also from Israel. And for the recent 5 years or so, working from Karamba, protecting the world.
Thank you, Asaf. And last but certainly not least, Megan, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyler, and thanks, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So I'm Megan Sanford. I'm the Vice President, Chief Product Security Officer for Schneider Electric's energy management business. Schneider Electric is a very, very large global company that provides both energy and automation solutions for the globe. It's a company that believes that electricity and energy is a fundamental human right. We're, as I said, a very large company with over 135,000 employees, I think across 100 countries globally. And very excited to be supporting Schneider, and important to me, critical infrastructures around the world. Of course, Schneider is it's pretty neat in that from a global market share, it's very well balanced in that 30% comes from North America, 30% comes from Europe, and then the other 30% and some change comes from Asia and other continents as well. So with that, a little bit about my background. For Schneider Electric, I'm in charge of the overall strategy and execution of the energy management business's product security program. So when I talk about product security, I kind of view it as two sides of a coin, where one part of it is controls framework compliance, things like complying and testing and building specs to 62443. As the other side of the coin is the really neat differentiation we can bake into the product by improving the overall cybersecurity user experience for the customer by simplifying cyber and building it right into the features of the product. Fundamentally, I view cyber and product security in the same way that folks should view product safety as just a quality element that needs to be present and inherent and secure by design within the product from the get-go. My background prior to that, I've worked at Rockwell Automation, leading both product security and product safety. And before that, I was at GE, where I worked on their product security incident response team, as well as the GE Global Research. Before that, I led critical infrastructure protection for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And right now, just because it's pertinent to this subject, I'll bring it up in that I'm also the founder and I lead a community-led effort called Incident Command System for Industrial Control Systems, where we're seeking to provide a common framework and language for cyber first responders, people that are doing this type of work, to communicate company to company, government to government on a global scale. So really exciting work. I'm a security geek at heart, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Let's start this off. So Benedict, the first question is for you. What is the difference between disclosing incidents versus vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely, that's a good question that I think it's a good question to ask at the very beginning. There's definitely elements where I would say there's a lot of overlap, but there are also certain elements where there's differences. I think what we can all agree on that in both cases, customers should always be made aware of them if they impact the product that they're using. For example, one important differentiation is probably timing. Depending on the nature of the incident, that usually have an immediate customer impact, such as a cloud service being not available or the leak of personal identifiable information. For that one, we probably want to disclose that based on legal requirements that are also in place very quickly. For vulnerabilities, on the other hand, if there's usually no indication that they're not actively being exploited, then most in the industry agree that they should usually be fixed first and an update made available before disclosing all of the details to prevent other malicious actors using that information. Yeah, and as I said, for cloud services, you should really make sure that customers are made aware of that very quickly. Also, I would say incidents, that's based on the nature of what they are. They often happen unexpectedly, whereas when it comes to vulnerabilities, manufacturers can, at the very least, reduce the risk of vulnerabilities by designing a secure product in the first place, obviously, but also trying to find them before any bad guys do. There's all kinds of investments you can do, like fuzzing and red team exercise and all that. And then they usually, once they're fixed by the manufacturer, there's a CVE published for that. So there's common industry practices around disclosing vulnerabilities, like CVEs that I mentioned before. Usually researchers give companies about 90 days to fix them and then report them. There's also upcoming legal requirements for IoT devices in the EU and the UK, with most of them based on the ETSI EN 303645 standard. But also for disclosing incidents, there's established legal requirements in different jurisdictions, such as in the EU and in the US by, for example, the SEC and the FTC. So I think there's some characteristics that are shared, but there's also significant differences. And I think manufacturers should really have a plan in place for both of those before they take place for the first time, and really prepare their organization to make sure they both follow what is best practice, but also what are the legal requirements.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add?
I believe that there are two formalized definitions and clear distinctions between the two. A vulnerability is typically defined as a weakness or a flaw within the product, whereas an incident is an actual breach within an environment. And so a quick way to decouple the two is, if you think about a vulnerability being kind of left of boom and an incident being right of boom, of something happening, that's an easy way to qualify that distinction.
Thank you for that.
I might even add, it's a bit of a simple thing, but for me, a vulnerability is just an incident waiting to happen. And I think that's kind of a glib thing to say, but with Internet of Things and with increased connectivity, one of the things that's new, was never new in sort of IT, but it's newer in OT, particularly if you're still relying on air gapping and Purdue and things, is that there's a lot of monoculture in a lot of the new stuff that we have. And so a vulnerability in a common network stack or common comms component or something like that, when I say it's an incident waiting to happen, the boom that Megan mentioned may not be confined to a single site anymore. If you've got a vulnerability that becomes known, you can have lots of collateral damage very, very rapidly, as we've seen in very simple cases with the ransomware attacks that became popular just sort of 2-3 years ago. But nobody really set out to infect the road gantries above the highways in the UK, but you know what? It was running a bad Windows on its controller and it got anyway. So I think that's the real thing to be careful of there in treating them the same, because process is not the same for those two things.
Thank you for that. Megan, where should a company start if they want to understand incident disclosures, and what requirements might be in play?
Sure. So we'll touch briefly on the vulnerability handling and disclosure process in and of itself, because companies will often find themselves, when they're creating product security programs, it's normally built out of a report that they got from a researcher where they start delving into this vulnerability handling and disclosure place. And so many product security programs start as product security incident response teams, and then they grow organically from there. And so we're going to pretend for a second that a company has gone through this process and they've complied to something like IEC 30111 and 29147 for vulnerability handling and disclosure, and that team that's used to handling vulnerabilities and working with their communications department and working with legal, that structure exists. And from there, it's a logical leap then to begin planning and expanding your program to include the coordination and the entire process around the incident piece. And with that, I encourage folks to get in close sync with their legal counsel and understand first what their contractual obligations are. In many cases, depending on when the contract was written, there may have not been any mention of cybersecurity or the need to disclose. That's kind of one part that should definitely be investigated. If they do find that cyber is specifically mentioned, there are customers that have expectations and they outline what those are up front in time periods, normally hours to days to even weeks, within which they expect to be notified if there is a breach within the company, and if there may be reason to believe that some of their data that was housed within the contract or within the relationship could have been exposed. So that's kind of the customer angle and the expectation setting there from a liability contractual landscape, what you were obligated to do through your contractual relationships. But there's also the regulatory side, which is what segments do I play in? Are they highly regulated? Do these regulators or these other contracts have reporting requirements that I need to be aware of, so that if I have reason to believe that an incident has occurred on my network or within a product of mine or what have you, that I know when the clock starts ticking specifically, right? I know that the 2018 DFAR supplemental, for example, has very clear reporting requirements for companies that are defense contractors for the US government. And so DFARS is a good example of reporting requirements. I know that other regulators and government entities have similar expectations. And so definitely understand from the customer standpoint what is out there, what those timelines look like, and importantly, when, of course, according to that guidance, does the clock start ticking? Because that's another nuanced piece, in that there may be some interpretation as to when you formally know that it's an official incident versus an alert has popped up on your SIEM and you're not quite sure what it is and you're still trying to disposition it.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to add to that question? Well, I think that leads nicely into a question for Asef. What is the expected speed of the action and assessment of severity? As these are cyber physical systems, how can we afford the false positive and wasted time when real attacks start hitting, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, well, this is indeed a big question, and well, unfortunately, one of the questions without a good answer, because it really depends on the incident, and it really depends on which industry you're at and what regulations you have to follow. Of course, some require reporting immediately or reporting within 24 hours. And then within these 24 hours, you have to do whatever you can in order to understand and in order to be able to notify, to have a meaningful notification regarding what is the impact. And again, impact is, tied to severity, right? What is the safety repercussions? What is going on? And this is, sometimes these attacks takes weeks and months, and underneath everything that you have, and now you have 24 hours to reassess. This is a very difficult topic that a lot of us are thinking days and nights how to stay on top of the information. It's not only the information, because the information is abundant. It's exactly that false positive questions that you ask. How to suck the meaningful information out of it. Understand what is related to the attack and what is not. What is the how do I get the root cause? How do I already create a mitigation plan, something that I can report as part of the incident reporting, as these are the things that we are doing. We disconnected that, we are working on a backup, we are, and understand that these mitigations are already solving the problem. So it's a very complex problem without a clear answer, general answer. It's, always per incident, always per attack, and always working with a lot of uncertainty, sometimes iteratively, sometimes based on gut feeling and instincts, and a lot of experience that the people in this industry have, until you see that you got rid of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question for John. Security incidents are rarely, and I would say almost never, neatly confined to a single entity. What are the most effective ways of coordination across corporate boundaries?
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. That's actually a really good lead on from the last two, actually, because I think a couple of really important points for making a difference in the real world versus sort of writing stuff on paper and regulations. So yeah, just I guess my thoughts on that in general, and I'd be glad to take questions or encourage questions from the audience as well. But it seems to me that if you're doing IIoT, or basically anything with connected machines, the connectivity means there's something on either end, and invariably, if you've got value to that, there's going to be other businesses on the other end. And increasingly, as we get more specialist stuff, as people get better at doing IoT and so on, we have a real functioning marketplace now in technology. But what that leads to is a kind of product supply chain where you've got lots of people's bits that go in to make a whole system. And you've also got an operational supply chain where lots of people's data goes into creating an operational system. And I guess the two sort of really important things to realize are, firstly, that something happening to a business needs to be notified, but it's not as black and white as it used to be. And when we talk about vulnerability disclosure or incident, it sounds like you're just sort of doing it once to one place. But actually, one of the really important things you have to do to be effective in your response and have that kind of team sport, as they say, of cybersecurity, of everybody working together, doing the right things at the right time to minimize the risk and impact, minimize the boom. I like what Megan said there. Is that you can't just sort of work it all out in secret and then tell somebody. You need to know who's adjacent to me, who do I need to tell how much in order that they can do their job to fix the thing. If I've got a bug in my comms module, how do I get that back to the supplier? They fix the bug, I bring it back in, now my safety authority approves it. Once I've got my regulatory paperwork filed for the new configuration or for my CMDB, how do I get that in place? And then how do I get operational again before I then go and tell onward customers or whoever? So one really important thing is it's not always responsible to disclose until you've fixed the thing. And so having that staging, knowing who needs to know what when, is a really important thing, and absolutely work that out before you have the problem. Know who your suppliers are and what your supply chain looks like. And that leads to a thing that I was reminded of when Megan was speaking just a moment ago about when the clock starts ticking. Because actually the other thing that you need to do to be really effective and to respond quickly when you've got multi-party threats or multi-source threats is to know who knew what at what time. If I as a supplier haven't been formally notified, I haven't been given a bug report or whatever, my clock doesn't start ticking yet. I don't know. And it's very easy to drop the ball. So back when I was doing the big system security, we worked on some PKIs hardware for smart grid, for example, in the UK here. There is so much wasted time in people sending emails, putting in bug reports, having phone calls, having the status meetings to say, basically, we know there's a very small bug in this thing. We know how to fix it. We know what needs to be done. But we spent, in a real incident, I won't go into too many details, obviously, but real incident in a former life, a couple of weeks of relatively straightforward coding took a year to get deployed into the site, largely because of these inefficiencies, the double checking and the uncertainty that things were fixed. So communicating, knowing who knows what on both sides of the coin, and working together to fix the problem rather than working against each other to shift the blame is absolutely essential. We can't deal with the inefficiency for future Industry 4.0.
That is so important. Thank you so much for that, John. Next, let's go to Benedict. I love this question. Learning about an incident as a customer can be both confusing and scary. What are some best practices that manufacturers of IoT devices should follow when they communicate incidents to their customers?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question to also ask about the receiving end of receiving incident notifications and not just the sending end. So I think, first of all, there's no silver bullet answer to this. It really depends on several factors, the type of device, how it's being used, how the incident is really impacting the users, obviously any legal requirements. Megan also made a great point on the differentiation between an alert and an incident. Like, at what point do you qualify telling your customer or you don't? So those are really important questions to ask. I can share how we do it at our team at Azure Sphere at Microsoft. We basically, once we have determined that it is an incident and we know about the timeline and legal requirements from our legal department, our approach is really to try and communicate to our customers about incidents in a customer-centric way. So whenever we communicate to customers about incidents, we try to answer 5 questions. How is the customer affected? What actions do customers have to take? What actions does Microsoft take? What's the timeline? And how can I get more help? So we go through this question, all of these questions when we have an incident, how we disclose them. So when it gets to the first question, how is the customer affected? Is that something that impacts the use of the device, and how does it so? Like, is it, for example, some that the cloud service is down, but it still works, but they have to know how, and if there's anything they have to do. What actions do they have to take? Do they have to install an update? Is there anything they need to do to protect themselves if it's a vulnerability, for example? Those are important questions. But we also try to tell them what we are trying to do. So when it gets to the question of what actions Microsoft does take, we really try to tell them what the full scope is of the incident, what we're trying to do to fix it. If the cloud is down, for example, why is it down? What are we doing to bring it back up? And then the fourth question, what is the timeline, is often a very important question from the customer perspective as well. If, for example, it is the cloud, when can I expect it to be up and running again? I mean, for some of our customers, it can make a big difference whether it's 2 hours or whether it's 2 days or something like that. So that is really important to know for customers and how it impacts their use of the device. So we always try to answer that as well. But we also recognize that for all customers, the impact might be different. So we also try to provide them with a resource on how they can reach out to us and our team to either share more information with us. Sometimes it's really helpful to get more telemetry, for example, or information from a customer, on how it is impacting their device. And we always try to provide a specific contact on our team and Microsoft support teams to really try to help them. So we have templates for those. And whenever we have an incident, our comms team gets looped in very early. And I saw that was one of the questions from the Q&A already. So for us, we really try to involve the comms team. We even did that actually before we launched our product. We had our public launch in February. And before we even went live, we went through drills where our comms team is following a certain process where they get looped in when it's an incident at a certain point, and then they work with our engineering team to fill out those 5 questions. And then when we get the green light from our legal department, then they have everything already in place to fire. So that's at least how we do it.
That's great. Thank you. And that leads into another great question. Asaf, what is the level of IT OT knowledge required in the incident response process, expertise of events analysis, and how does that connect to the ICS?
Yeah. So again, depends on the incident and depends on the attack and depends. So there are, some attacks are very, very difficult to identify and really hidden well, and therefore the incident response teams even are they're required to have multidiscipline knowledge, and a lot of it is in IT and a lot of it is in the OT and the critical infrastructure, especially in the critical infrastructure stuff. So yeah, so the level of details and understanding and built on a lot of experience is necessary there. I'm running through events in my head, and yeah, so I think that what the question is pointing to is that it would be great, and it can be great if we could have that information accessible, or accessible in a digestible way, in a way that doesn't require such high level of expertise and experience, because this level of expertise and experience are rare, and making mistakes is so easy, and false positives are so abundant, so it's difficult to be really expert in this field. And when there is such high level of expertise required, it calls for something systematic to help us be able to come to conclusions more easy, faster, based on more clear indicators, clear actionable list of action items, or list of, let's call them things to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be action items, but and I think that this is where this industry is going for. This is what we are looking for, and comparing to where other industries are at. Okay, so why not? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's such an important point too, because really there's such an abundance of knowledge that's needed, and something secure today most likely will not be secure tomorrow. So it's a living process.
Yeah.
And you have just led me to a perfect question for John. So on that note, how do we best deal with the cybersecurity skills shortage, especially as it pertains to this topic?
Yeah, that is a very great question. Yeah, I find myself struggling these days with the commentary about the cyber skills shortage, and it's become a thing even in this current age. In the UK, I'm sure we have some folks watching from the UK. It's now being advertised that, don't worry that the theatres are closed for COVID. Don't worry that you can't have a career in the arts anymore, because you can retrain for a career in cybersecurity. And that's the actual example that they're bringing up time and time again, is stop ballet, do cyber. So it's kind of known everywhere that there's a skills shortage, but I think we're actually going down the wrong track, because the thing most important, really, I think that Asaf said about addressing the shortage is that they're not general skills. I mean, first of all, these things are rare because it takes a particular type of brain. And many people just simply don't want to do this stuff. So there's a base that you require, and then a level of generic training. But the thing that makes you really good at quickly analyzing and addressing cyber threats in a cyber physical system, in a real installation, isn't those general skills. It's the knowledge of your specific site. And even more than that, it's the understanding of what it means to your business for a particular thing to go down. Because in a great many cases, like if we look at how CVEs, CVSS, all the sort of vulnerability scoring works, the reason why it's so scary for a user to receive one of those things is because the disclosure basically says, this thing is broken. And if you look at a deep enough level of detail, you say, how broken is it? And they say, well, probably 9.9 broken, because if you use this thing in a particular way and you tickle it in a particular way, it fails. So the skills that we seem to be aiming for is essentially just ramping up and increasing the scale of the smart people who can read that kind of information and interpret it and do something about it. But it just doesn't, even if we had those people, that process doesn't scale. And what I think we actually need to do is fundamentally rethink how we tool up to do this stuff, so that you can have a few generals, leaders, managers, whoever, who still do the hard work. You need people to do analysis and disclose. But then if we have better languages, and I think, forgive me, Megan, I'm not sure I've looked into the group that you run, but it sounds like you're doing something very valuable here, which is having a language so that the first people to investigate and do the hard work and find a type of incident that was permitted by a type of problem could actually write that up and transmit it to the rest of the world in a way that's consumable, so that everybody else with much fewer skills and hopefully an awful lot of automation can actually take that in and sort of contribute to an IIoT or ICS immune system where everybody sort of feeds back what they've learned, everybody else patches up, and you don't have to have everybody doing the same work again, or everybody reading complicated stuff, or all the other things that we do today. So for sure we have a cyber skills shortage. For sure I'd like to see more investment in this market. But I think the focus on trying to train more people to be security analysts is just a hiding to nothing. I think we need to be smarter about how we produce and communicate that data.
That is a wonderful answer. Thank you, John. Megan, this is one of my favorite questions. Why has incident disclosure become such a hot topic? How does it impact, or how can it impact, the reputation of an organization?
Sure. So I think it's become a hot topic for all the reasons that anyone here, anyone in the audience would probably immediately recognize, is that the incidents is what catches the news cycles, and that's what's publicized a lot. I do want to touch on, John was mentioning vulnerabilities, and I do want to throw a statistic out to the group pertaining to ICS attacks, though. People couple in vulnerabilities with ICS attacks, but what the data actually tells us is that less of half of all of ICS attacks known to us have anything to do with the vulnerability.
Yeah.
Okay. So use that data as you would, but back to the point on, I think I saw a question come in. How do you determine if an equipment malfunction, physical network impact may be cyber related? And this is where things get interesting. And this is how I'm going to round out, touching a little bit more on what John said, and then coming back to your question, Tyler, on how does this impact the reputation of an organization? The simple answer is that, in my experience, an organization may not know for a few days, in fact, if something is an actual fault with the equipment or if it has anything to do with cyber. And the way that you uncover that is, initially, what it's going to look like is what I refer to lovingly as JDLR, just doesn't look right, okay? And from JDLR, someone is going to start escalating what they've seen, either on a seam or just something is not functioning properly on a manufacturing line or any ICS environment for that matter. And eventually it's going to land with an analyst who's going to try to disposition and make a judgment call as to whether or not logs should be pulled from those devices. And you should bring in DFIR experts to determine forensically, going through the logs, hopefully going through 90 or more days of logs to determine what network traffic you're seeing, and if something has gotten onto your network that doesn't look right, and or if different IP addresses have been entering your organization, if there has been lateral movement, if files have started changing, if different executables are taking place within systems. And that's how you're going to know if you're dealing with a fault in your equipment or if it's something much more nefarious. After that point, once you have determined that it could be commodity malware that's gotten in, right, from an unknown connection that was loose out there. It could be something a bit more targeted. But when that happens, the points that were brought up earlier that Benedict mentioned, you definitely need a communications playbook, hopefully, understanding how to pull in the right people to make judgment calls around what public statements you may need to make, because you have regulators that you may need to notify. Hopefully you choose to notify them and give them a heads up before somehow the information leaks out of your organization and it becomes public, because there's always the chance that it could, okay? Especially if you're in a large organization or there's multiple parties working a response. And your customers, right? You want to do right by your customers and ensure that if it's an incident where you don't believe that the impact is very widespread, maybe that's a situation where you pick up the phone and you make those disclosures to the right people, to the right contacts that they've designated you to work with during a response, or other mechanisms, whatever you and your customers have worked out with. That's the path that you need to follow so that they know where the information is coming in if something happens. That's a very key part of the disclosure process that maybe I've been remiss in mentioning, but customers should have an expected way that they know that you're going to notify them. Either that's a designated contact if it's a smaller organization, or a particular secure email, or whatever that has been worked out. You need to follow that process so that you're not catching your customers or putting them on their back feet. And then the public disclosure process in, do you want to make a public statement? If you can anticipate this being on the lunchtime news broadcast or the 6 p.m. kind of dinner time news, then guess what? Those are your news cycles and you need to plan around that. And pulling in your comms folks beforehand can help with it. In terms of ultimate reputational impact, I think that that's the court of public opinion. In many cases, I think where you've seen responses handled well, the organization has been transparent. They've come out with what they've known. They've been transparent also when they've said that they don't have all the answers yet, but they have communicated when they'll be doing updates and when they will be getting in front of the camera or making another update, even if not much more information is available. They've been clear on when people can expect information. And so I think that's an example of cases being handled well. And then there are cases where it just kind of seems like they put someone in the camera that maybe wasn't prepared, maybe was obviously nervous or looked like they were withholding information or what have you, right? But whom you choose to be the public face of your incident and your public response to whatever has happened counts a lot in the court of public opinion. And I won't say, I think that the public can be forgiving as long as you kind of come out with it and you're forthright. I think cases where the information has been drug out and come out over time and trickled in, I think that those are examples where maybe if, those folks had it over to do again, they would do something different.
Thank you. John, you look like you're dying to add something to that.
I was just nodding along. It's all very right. But Since given the opportunity, yeah, I will take the opportunity to give a slight side nod to something else that I do, which is that I'm the chair of the Security and Trustworthiness Working Group in the Digital Twin Consortium, which I'm guessing a number of participants here know the Industrial Internet Consortium. So DTC is a peer organization under the Object Management Group there. And it's really important to us that we don't have a security working group. We have a security and trustworthiness working group because the levers of trust are significantly more nuanced than the levers of security. So looking, we did look at Joe's question, and Megan gave a good answer to that, but I think I would only underscore that trustworthiness is ultimately what people are looking for. So whether it's the public opinion thing of, do I trust this company not to screw up again? Do I trust this company to try really hard to make me right? Comes down to a technical level as well, that if you've got a malfunction in a piece of equipment, to a large degree, it doesn't matter prima facie whether that's a cyber hack or whether it's just bad programming or whether it was poorly physically machined so that its sensors don't work or it doesn't spin as fast as it thinks it's spinning. And whatever it might be that caused the thing, ultimately you want your stuff to work the way you expect it to work every time you ask it to work. And anything that isn't that, it degrades the trust that you have in the system. And I just think sometimes we can get a bit too hung up on digging down too deep and exposing too much of the technology because it looks like a tech failure, when actually what we want to do is come back up, look at the impact that we've had on the humans on the other end of this equation and say, why are these people sad right now? What did we do that has upset them? And it's not this machine was broken or somebody shone a laser into my light sensors and I forgot to have tolerance on it, but rather they delivered me, a piece of food that was inedible, or my vehicle crashed itself. So I only wanted to add, I guess, that we, certainly in my sphere, have developed rather a tech-centric vocabulary and a tech-centric approach to disclosure and action, when actually that's often not the thing that hurts your customer in the end, if you really dig under.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that statement? No? Okay. Well, this is a question for Benedict and Asef, and I think it's a great question. Just in its part, it's a continuation of a prior question. Disclosing incidents is only half the story. What should the manufacturers of IoT devices do throughout the mitigation process, and how should they keep their customers informed?
Any preference who goes first, Asaf?
Benedict, why don't you go first?
Okay, perfect. So I think, first of all, manufacturers should be aware of the fact that disclosing incidents to customers is it's not always a one-time event, and then the manufacturer can say, my job is done here. As I mentioned before, incidents often have to be disclosed while they are unfolding, depending on the nature of the incident, and that might change over time. As Megan has said, in German we call it the salami tactic, where you only give a little slice at the beginning, but you don't show the full sausage. You definitely shouldn't do that. You should tell the customers everything you know, especially from a legal perspective. And sometimes that might be as little as 72 hours in the European Union, for example, for certain types of incidents from when you learn about it. So that also goes back to what I said earlier in terms of thinking about how to answer those questions before they happen, like going through the process of defining your security incident response in those 72 hours that would not be a very pleasant experience. So you should definitely make sure to have that all lined up, including the communications function, and then really try to be as transparent as possible. I think you also have to be aware of the fact of how do you reach the customers? For some, you might have certain contractual requirements, and you might have an email or an alias to the CISO. But what we really try to do to reduce as many points of failures as possible. What if those people are on vacation, or the email doesn't work anymore, or that person has moved on? So we really try to communicate everything we do publicly on a blog post that all of our customers can subscribe to and that we can point them to. So that is always out there for anyone to see. We don't make any distinction between telling one customer one thing and the other one maybe a little more. We just share everything we know on a blog that we run, and that really enables us to point our customers to that resource and make sure we reach all the right people.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. It's indeed a very important and interesting one. I completely agree with what Benedict just detailed, and maybe with just one thing regarding the publicly available information. Not all vendors can have that policy. It's really depending on how you make your resources of equipment available to the customer. Sometimes it's really specific to the specific relationship between the vendor and the customer. But I completely agree that a mechanism that is fully reliable of communication between a vendor and their customers is something that is critical for the relationship. The communication should be as transparent as possible. What I would add is something that we've learned in the past that is also in Checkpoint, that we've learned in the past that is very, very important. When an incident is now unfolding, customers not only want to know as much as when you know it, they also want to have a clear, as clear as you, at least, clear understanding of the plan to fix. Or what is the immediate mitigation and what are you doing, tomorrow, and what will be next week, and how do we get out of this? And if you give them a very clear way out of the situation and present and you're working, of course, diligently and days and nights, and you have teams all over the world that are fixing this. Customers are with you in this effort because it's your problem, but it's their problem as well. They want to see that you really put your head into it. You're following the protocol. You keep them updated, and if they can help, they will help. It's amazing. Once you do that this way, it becomes the problem is shared, and you actually win a customer instead of losing it. So this is my 2 cents.
That's a great answer. So I'm going to take questions from the audience in just a second. But first, I want to ask each of you a question. So I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but shortly after COVID, when healthcare started really moving to telehealth, Health and Human Services actually lifted HIPAA penalties for any hacks or anything that was related to telehealth. How has COVID affected reporting, and how has it changed? Have any of the regulations changed? Has there been anything lightening? Really, how has COVID affected how reporting is done? And how we
I
respond
can
to it?
share our experience. The telehealth companies are so busy that they just don't have time for cybersecurity, and we are going to pay for COVID in so many ways. This is one of them. We are now putting a lot of we're now making a lot of easing regulations and pouring money into the system, etc. I mean, government-wise, this is one of the things that we're going to pay for in the future. These companies just don't have time for cybersecurity right now. They are filling the gaps of missing services. They are working days and nights. It's amazing to see, and inspiring even, and probably the right decision, because this is the times where cybersecurity will actually slow you down, and you need to act as fast as possible. And we will have a ramp up, a very serious ramp up after COVID, when eventually it will come. We will have a very serious ramp up because many industries shifted. Logistics just had a tremendous shift, the whole industry of deliveries is now, it's amazing what happened here. Telehealth is just another example, and there are other such examples, and they will have, you know, I'm expecting a peak in you know, cybersecurity solutions for these industries next spring or summer, when things ease or cool down.
Thank you for that. You know, also you can add to this with, you know, more people shifting to a work from home environment. You know, how does that also, how is that included? Has that changed how we respond to things, to incidents? Has it changed any of the reporting? John, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've seen, we're working with NCS is interesting because, you know, you'd think there'd be a big shift to work from home because everybody's spacing out, but actually all these people are key workers. So they've been, certainly in my neck of the woods in Europe, they've all been going to work every day anyway. So the change isn't necessarily as great as you would think there. But yeah, we've had the same experience as Asaf just explained, that actually the need to keep the lights on, and with fewer personnel, because they're obviously now spaced out, they're running different shifts and everything, actually took things off the agenda for some time. We were running projects with major industrials back in March, just when it was all heating up, and we just got the project paperwork for one of those to restart last week, right? And we've got a flood of things that have just started coming in late September, early October. So it was basically a 6-month gap. Everybody stopped doing anything at all. So I think a couple of things on your points in particular. I think that a moratorium rather than a total lifting is probably a good idea. So we need to have a deadline for people being back under the full penalties. So that it concentrates the mind not to go too crazy, because there's a difference between keeping the lights on and actually trying to like make features and get a jump on your competitors by exploiting this newly free industry. But actually, I wonder myself whether that's such a bad thing, because where I'd like to get to is a free market for products and services which compete on their merits. And I would like one of those merits to be an overt, well-stated, traceable and accountable measure of how well the cybersecurity of a thing is handled. Again, it comes down to this idea of language communication. We need a taxonomy. So you need to ultimately have 3 or 4 nice shiny certificates that you can attach to a product. But I actually think this is an opportunity when we look back and everybody says, hey, there was no problem, we didn't get hacked. And use that as an excuse to do nothing for the next 2 or 3 years. I actually would like to let them, you go for that. But now third-party damages are a thing. Finally, with credit card breaches, we are finally allowed to charge for onward damages rather than just cost of sale. That needs to come in here. They say you are free to go outsource somebody who hasn't got a HIPAA certificate. You're free to source somebody who doesn't have a proper, decent, up-to-date ISO audit against their name. And that's your risk. If you get somebody who's got the certificate and they get hacked or something happens, or they now pay for you. And we get that, get those promises out in the open. We have them well made and we make them valuable in money terms, because ultimately business is business. The risk is risk, and absolutely telehealth versus no health at all is definitely a good idea, right? So let's embrace that, but let's actually make conscious risk decisions that are quantified rather than unconscious ones.
I like that. And you're right. It is also a time for where we're going to start seeing a lot of innovation, and that's great. Megan, same question.
Sure. So I think, simply put, I think that the home network has now become an extension of the corporate network. I think that that's what we're seeing now, right? And, necessity is the mother of invention. And these companies are allowing remote work, and that's a great thing. And there are there are cases where VPN and remote connectivity. I know that I've seen several security vendors beeping up their solutions that they offer to customers, and I think that it's probably a good thing. I think if you were to look at over the past few months, something that I caught recently that hit the news that was really interesting was, I think I read where the Department of Treasury is now considering fining companies that pay the ransom on ransomware, right? Because it is a perverse incentive for people to continue to pay ransoms when they're hit with ransomware. And in some cases, the business has made judgment calls to go ahead and pay the ransom, especially if they didn't have good backups in place and things like that to get their data back. And I'm not in a position to comment over or that being right or wrong, or the decisions of one company versus another. But I do think that you're seeing now the government trying to meet the problem head on, at least the U.S. government, and stating that the best way to begin to kind of fight back of this rise in ransomware is to cut the funding off. And so that in and of itself, I thought, was a rather bold and interesting move from the U.S. Department of Treasury.
Thank you for that. Again, last but not least, Benedict.
Yeah, I mean, my fellow panelists have already made a lot of great points. I think what we have seen is that I think we've seen a mix of reactions to COVID. I think we've seen some companies who had to refocus their investments and actually, with a limited amount of resources, move on to like really speeding up digital transformation. Our CEO Satya Nadella has said that we've seen digital transformation that we would have expected to happen over the next 5 years that really happened in the last couple of months just because of COVID. I think some companies, as Asaf has already mentioned, with their now limited resources and the business impact they've had, they probably won't want to spend the extra dollar to buy something secure because they really are struggling to survive at this point. But I also think that long term, after COVID, as he has said as well, now that companies are realizing they have to rely increasingly on digital infrastructure, and that especially applies to the industrial and IoT space, I expect to have a significant increase once we're out of COVID, where companies really have to think about, okay, what if something like that happens again? Do I really want to rely on all these insecure products that I'm using? So I think there might be like a down slope right now, but I think we'll see a significant increase afterwards. I mean, regarding the HIPAA fines, I think governments have to make decisions on priorities and what is more important. And I think health is one of those issues where that might have been the right call to enable patients to see their doctors. But my personal opinion is that lifting HIPAA fines should not be a long-term solution to fix that problem. I think there should be incentives for them to actually invest in secure products and be rewarded for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now let's take some questions from the audience. Here's first question. I would like to hear from the panel. When do they bring in their communications team into the disclosure process? Early, later, when ready to go public, or somewhere in between? And I think that you've kind of talked about this, Megan, but could we maybe expand upon it?
I mean, 2 years before anything happens in a perfect world, right? Yeah. I mean, they've already been kind of brought in. The good thing about well-run responses is that everyone has a role, and everyone's role is respected, and everyone's allowed to play that role. To answer your question directly, though, I think that once there is the hint that there could be an incident, even before an incident is formally declared, incident coordination calls will stand up, and I think that any good company out there that has a response program is going to have both their legal and their comms on that initial call.
Thank you. Anyone else want to join? Yes, John.
Yeah, I think everything's been said on the specific question, but one other thing that's really important is, yes, people who have a role should do their role, but people who don't have a role must not perform a role. And I say this from very specific experience that when I've been in charge of these things in much larger companies, it's very common. Like we in Thales, for example, we were supplying hardware security modules to extremely sensitive users. Most of the Fortune 100, all of the banks use this stuff for their core security. So it's very exciting and interesting. And as soon as there's a sniff of anything, or even if there isn't a sniff of anything, we would get phone calls all the time from journalists, especially the kind of slightly less salubrious tech press, calling up people, finding them on LinkedIn. You get the phone number of a senior software engineer. They get a puff of ego to think they're talking to somebody fancy, and all of a sudden the whole thing's got out without your without any kind of process at all. So the only other thing to remember is, absolutely, I agree with everything else that's said. You should have your incident response process created by your marketing and communications team on day one of your business. But also remember that you need to media train everybody else to not say anything if they don't have a specific role.
Would anyone else like to answer that question?
I think the only thing I would add is probably to do test runs. I mean, you can have the best plan in place in the world. And when we defined our plan based on industry best practices, and we did test runs, and we run a security challenge over the last couple of months where we invited 70 researchers from 21 countries to really hack our product and tell us and get increased bounty amounts. And just from the high number of submissions we received, we learned about so many improvements in our internal process. So really make sure that having a plan is great. And as Megan has said, maybe not day one, but like very, very early and before you launch, but really make sure you also go through it and see how it plays out, because there's a lot of things that you can improve on after you go through it in an actual event.
Thank you. Asaf, anything to add?
No.
No? Okay.
Megan has something.
I will make one
Okay.
comment, because I'm definitely a tabletop exercise nerd as well. And I have noticed that you mentioned exercises, and I totally agree. And I see that as a huge gap, in that people write a plan. Okay. Normally it's not a modular plan anyway. It's not something that can kind of be easily read and digested. And you're really counting on people having read that in advance. And that may be counting on kind of a, false hope there. But I see this happen in cybersecurity, and it's very different than how it happens in kind of homeland security or national security or any type of government planning, and that people in cyber tend to utilize exercises as a way to train people, rather than training people on the plan and then exercising. But I absolutely have seen that. And I'd say that doing something is better than doing nothing. But I will say that write a plan, but try to actually train people on your plan instead of jumping right into an exercise on the plan, unless you truly are using the exercise as that first level of tabletop exercise, where it's really called a facilitated discussion, rather than being on the full spectrum of a large scale tabletop exercise.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Next question. Organizations who hold personal data, if they get attacked and these organizations store the footprints of the attacks, what if instead an organization does not report an attack in fear to loss of goodwill of their customer and try to tackle those attacks? Second, what possible penalties from regulatory boards would an organization face if they disclose about these attacks and possible personal data compromises? Sorry, this is a strangely worded question, but Asaf, do you want to try that? Take a stab.
Yeah, well, I think that I will represent the entire panel by saying that you shouldn't hide. You shouldn't hide information from your customers, and usually it's not even business-wise and future looking. It's not an approach that will be beneficial. I'm not talking, about the legal sides of it that you have to disclose, and not about the fines and the things that you are just put yourself in jeopardy of, but eventually things will go out. This is the nature of cybersecurity. Things do not stay under the carpet for a long time, and it will get out, and it will be public shaming and all all the things that are tied to people that are trying to hide their problems, the limitations. The right way is to hone that and understand it and get the right experts to help you mitigate and solve even. And of course, communicate that plan, and there's no way around it. Now, regarding the fines, I don't know. I was never in a position where we actually had to pay fines because we didn't disclose anything, which is, again, we discussed so much the matter of trustworthiness, and trust is such an important element of cybersecurity. You're just undermining cybersecurity if we cannot trust you.
Thank you for that.
And I think if I might add, sorry.
Yes, please.
I think one of the things that I see as a common theme from questions in forums like this is that it shouldn't be your strategy to talk to customers in the first place to basically say we sell a secure product and we'll never even have to notify you or reach out to you in the first place. Like, you should just be upfront and honest. If you're trying to sell a product that is secure and you'll never have to deal with an incident, that's a really bad marketing strategy. Like, we actually noticed that it's actually a positive when we talk to our customers and we actually tell them about the process we have in place if something goes wrong. So I think if you use that and kind of flip that mindset in the other direction, you can actually gain a lot of trust with customers and already prepare their mindset, and really tell them that you're prepared for when something like that will happen.
And they know it will happen. It happened to them before. They know you're not, an alien vendor that nothing happens to. So if you're coming to them and you'll say, no, nothing happened, they know you're full of, well, you can complete the sentence.
I think we have time for one more question. The next question is, have you ever worked with companies that have suffered a financial loss or were impacted negatively from a cyber attack or event? Do you see companies becoming more proactive versus reactive with protection as a result of these events?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes. And it's so obvious that when financial impact the brand, impact the customer, they shift resources, they work days and night to, never see that impact again. And it might take weeks or months, but in some cases it takes years. We are working with customers that it takes them years to, revamp whatever was bad, and they will, diligently work on that, which is, I know it's not nice. They should have thought about it before, but just like we talked about telehealth, it's a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of usually business priorities. And before, I think 2015, or maybe a bit earlier, 2014, or even between 12 to 13, cybersecurity was not considered the safety issue. So the safety standards didn't brought cybersecurity with them alone. And in the recent decade or so, cybersecurity is just, there with safety, and companies are doing whatever they can in order to, well, not all companies and not all, not everybody, but for sure, companies that suffered financial losses are top customers. That's for sure.
Does anyone have anything to add to that question?
I would, just an anecdote that I'm very pleased with, I suppose. Well, it's not even an anecdote, it's a simple fact, but I've seen this evolve quite nicely over the last, as I've said, like 10 years, to the point where the UK government now in our national infrastructure strategy has explicitly moved in the last couple of years from a strategy of security, which was focused on and paid vendors for 100% bulletproof crunchy shells around their stuff, to a strategy of resiliency, where you actually define, what am I working with, what are the impacts of stuff going wrong, and how do I organize my business around keeping running even when stuff goes down. So even at those very high ends of sensitive operations, people now realize that there is no such thing as total security, and what you need to do is organize yourself around keeping running, being resilient, being redundant, and having a plan. And that plan, obviously, to the point of this panel, has to include these days communicating with your supply chain, communicating with your value chain, communicating the right stuff to the right people at the right time, so that you get stuff fixed. Because, you know, the example from SF of, we had this problem, so we're going to move heaven and earth to fix that problem. Well, you know what? The reason why you had that problem with your firewalls was probably because you have an organizational strategy or a technical team that have a fundamental problem with the way they built the stuff. And the next time somebody comes to attack you, they're not going to attack you through that firewall port or configuration. They're going to attack you through the procedural flaw that led you to buy the other vulnerable thing, or didn't train your staff properly, or didn't you? So I'm seeing this actually really getting better, and we just need to keep now educating the market that there is no such thing as total security. You have to build for resiliency.
So we only have a few minutes left. I want to thank everyone on the panel. This was such a great discussion. I think we have time for each person to just kind of go through and just maybe say one final thought that you think is important for the audience to know. Shall we start with you, Benedict? We'll go in order of the slide.
Yeah, I think we actually covered a lot in a broad scope for what manufacturers and also customers should be aware of and ask the manufacturers of products that they're buying from. I think, as John just mentioned, security is not a destination, it's a journey, and making sure that both you as a customer are aware of that and ask the right questions to who you buy equipment from, but also as a manufacturer, be upfront to your customers about that fact and how you are a good partner when something goes wrong and not just when it goes right and when the product is working. I think that's probably what I would leave the audience with as a final statement.
Thank you. John?
So I would say, you know, communicating incidents obviously is important. You have to do that right. But I would also like to remind people that communicating can also prevent incidents. So, you know, knowledge is power. And if you are working with other people, whether that's other departments in your own company, whether it's vendors, whether it's connected operations, if you're communicating openly and transparently about what's going on, what the state of your stuff is, and where your security and trust posture is at any given point in time, that can actually prevent things from going boom in the first place. So do work together. Security is a team sport, and communicating can prevent incidents rather than having to embarrassingly talk about them.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Megan really quickly because we are running very low on time, and then we'll come back to you, Asaf.
Sure. So thanks everyone for your time today. It's been a blast. I would say, of course, I echo all the sentiments that everyone else has said, so I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to get tactical. So have a response plan that is modular, meaning that it can adapt over time to reflect new and present threats that are facing your organization. It's modular, right? And have a communications response annex to that plan so that you have something defined, and then train on that before you exercise, and then finally exercise. And of course, it's just good practice. Understand your suppliers, understand your partner networks, and you know, be handing out business cards in advance of something actually happening. I think that that's a good practice. But had a blast today again, and thank you.
Thank you. Asaf, just quickly.
Yeah, I would say that everything starts from good data. You need to have good cybersecurity infrastructure in place, and then everything becomes easier in terms of analysis, in terms of what to disclose, how to disclose, mitigation plan. All that becomes clear when things are not so vague. And instead of finding out after the attack, better invest in it before things, you know, go bad, just like we talked about these financial impacts.
Well, I want to thank you all. This was such a great discussion, and you know, I look forward to seeing the recording. And thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thank you
Thank
all
you,
for
everyone.
joining.
Bye-bye.
So if you like to join the Zero Trust session, is starting just now on the other channel.
That is also an awesome topic. We should do that.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you, guys.